Então é um prazer hoje receber a professora Deidre McCloskey aqui no Por Que Entrevista. Dr. McCloskey is a distinguished professor of economics, history, English, and communication at the University of Illinois at Chicago.
Or actually, I'm retired now.
Retired, good.
Deal.
She has authored 20 books or more, done 400 articles in many fields, ranging from economic history, statistics. Deidre, thank you very much for talking with us.
I'm extremely pleased to be again in Brazil, and very glad to talk to you.
Good. Thank you very much. Let's start with a very basic question that here in Brazil can be a little bit controversial. What is a liberal person, and what are the liberal ideas?
Well, I think in both your country and mine, the word liberal has been strangely changed. In my own country, you're a liberal if you're a democratic socialist. If you believe in a big state, and the state should not completely run, but should very much regulate the economy, that's called, in the United States, a liberal. Well, that's crazy. Yeah. In Brazil, at least in Latin America generally, often very conservative people who think the army should run the country are called liberal.
Yeah.
And they're against queers and homosexuals and so on. The correct definition is what the rest of the world says outside the Western Hemisphere, which is, it comes from Latin, of course, and it comes from the word liber. In Latin means a free person. Free as against slave.
Okay.
And the core definition of liberal is that we liberals, we real liberals, want a society in which everyone's free. No one has a master then. You can have a voluntary master, we call him the boss. Yes. That's fine, but you can walk away. Whereas if you're a slave, as in my country and yours, we have had lots of slaves, very late, the slaves can't walk away there, and if they don't do what you want, you hit them. That used to be true of wives compared to husbands. The husbands was the master, the boss, not the market boss, but the fist. It's a famous rule of thumb in Britain, which says you as a husband cannot beat your wife with a stick thicker than your thumb.
Wow, that's crazy.
You can't take a stick that's that big and hit her. It has to be smaller than your thumb.
Okay, so now that's the rule, the famous.
This is loco. This is insane. But it's what you'd expect from a agricultural society,
right.
From a traditional agricultural society, and this liberalism, this real liberalism of Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, and Mary Wollstonecraft and others, was really new in the 1700s. I mean, no one thought that slavery was a bad system until the 1700s, and some people started to dislike it, and finally in Brazil, it was abolished. They thought it was a sad thing if you became a slave. It's too bad for you.
That's part of the game.
It's part of the game.
Yeah.
You're going to go to heaven if you are a good slave. You'll go to heaven. So this idea that we should be equal in dignity, not in outcome necessarily. If I'm a very good singer and I make millions of dollars singing, that shouldn't be taken away from me. That's good. That's nice. But so it's not about outcome. It's about permission. You're permitted to walk away from a private job. You're not permitted actually to go back to the marriage case. It was almost impossible for people to get divorced once. And so, liberal means a society of free people.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's very clear.
Mm-hmm.
You also relate the idea and the concepts of liberalism with economic growth, right?
Yeah,
So they're
you
very
bet.
important, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And we have seen the impressive rise of China over the last 30 years,
Yeah.
right? Yet, I mean, if you would put China on a scale of government coercion and
Yeah.
liberalism,
Oh,
they would
yeah.
rank very top on that
Yeah,
list.
but
How can you reconcile that?
that's the China model that people talk about all
Yes.
the time. And it's a silly argument. It's really stupid. Because the parts of the Chinese economy that do well and have enriched, not enriched exactly, but made the ordinary Chinese, once earning $1 a day
Yeah.
per person, now earning more like $30 a day, that's a big increase,
Yeah.
are the parts that were free, that were liberal. Because what the Chinese Communist Party agreed to in 1978 was that it would stop interfering in the economy. That didn't mean that the Chinese Communist Party was going to allow anyone to vote for anything else,
Yes.
or that you could become a powerful political person any other way than through the party. And it didn't mean they weren't going to abuse Uyghurs
Yeah.
and that they weren't going to put the tanks in Tiananmen Square. No. So in politics, they were, as you agree, I agree with you, they're extremely illiberal. They're at the end of this crazy business they have now of facial recognition software.
Yes, it's crazy.
I was at an engineering school in the middle of China, and they were very proud to show me their facial recognition hardware and software, and I was to admire it. I was, oh, boy, that's a good idea. And I said, oh yeah, that's a good idea. I didn't say anything because it's a terrible idea.
Yes.
It's extremely illiberal
Yes,
because the
yes.
state then is your master, your lord. But in the economy, they let people start factories. You had to bribe the local Communist Party official. You had to do that, but it wasn't that big a deal. And although they still to this day in China, they have rules against moving from one province to another. It's a terrible thing. They're not enforced in many ways. You can go work in Shanghai. You come from the West, you can still go work in Shanghai, and at least before Xi Jinping, you could work in Shanghai, make money, send it back to your people in the West, and so on.
You cannot use the services, right? This.
Well, not just services. You could also be it's mainly construction.
But you're excluded from the. I mean, if you move from a different city,
You're
you're excluded from
the
basic
education system,
education. Yeah.
especially the education system. Because, by the way, there's no socialized medicine in China.
Yes, that's right.
So it's a very strange combination. But it's free in the economy, freer than Brazil. Here's this. This is an amazing fact, but it's true. It's harder to start a company in Brazil than in China.
Way harder.
It takes longer.
Yeah, that's.
You have to get permission and blah, blah, blah. In China, it's not like it is in Denmark or New Zealand, where it takes one day to start a company, an afternoon. But, so who's free?
Yeah, that's that's a good point. I think one of the perceptions that when China opened the economy was that maybe progress will bring democracy, and apparently it's not coming.
Not yet, although, as you know, there are these well-known examples, South Korea, Taiwan, but on the contrary, Singapore, which is authoritarian in its politics, but again, completely free in its economy. And it's not so much the Chinese model as the Singapore model that people ought to be talking about. because that was successful. But tyranny, on average, results in stupid economic policies. Tyranny, on average, results
that's
in
right.
bad art. Tyranny, on average, does bad things for people. That's just obvious.
Yes.
And only occasionally do you get a good tyrant.
Yes. Yes.
Stalin, I'm just reading a wonderful book by a man named Grossman, a Soviet novelist, called Forever Flowing, which is about the horrors of Stalinism and even the post-Stalin Soviet life. And there, people would work around the bad regulations of the economy that central planning imposed, but still they'd end up in the gulag.
Yes. So do you think? So I guess the only way to have long-term economic growth, or the best way at least, is to have a democratic country.
A free country.
Yeah, free
now,
country.
the word democratic, I'm a Democrat.
Okay.
I believe that everyone should have the vote. I believe that what outrages me about the Republicans in the United States is they try to suppress the vote, make it harder for poor people to vote. And I think that's terrible. But I believe in democracy not because majority vote produces the best decisions all the time. It often doesn't. But, but that's true of experts too. The experts got us into the second Iraq War,
Yeah.
the biggest foreign policy mistake in the United States since Vietnam. They got us into Vietnam too.
Yes.
It wasn't, a vote. Everyone put their hands up. Let's go to Vietnam. Let's crush the communists over there. No. It was experts. So it's not that. It's that democracy, giving everyone the right to vote, gives everyone dignity. And people care more about that than they care about their food. They want to be treated with respect. And that's the liberal idea. So when we say liberal democracy, really what we mean is that they should really go together and that they support each other. So a society in which is convinced that having free people is a good idea, to give permission to women and gays and poor people and black people and so on, is also a democratic society in the sense that people are given dignity. Now the danger, of course, is populism.
Yes.
That's the perversion of democracy. Because what you mean by populism is that the people vote to have a tyrant.
Yes.
Juan
That's
Perón,
Perón.
Hitler was elected. Putin is very popular. I don't know if that'll continue very long, but he's very popular, and so forth. And Donald Trump is a populist, although he wasn't, the majority didn't elect him, but still he got to be president. So there's that danger that the decisions will be bad from the majority. But as I say, I'm not too worried about that. I think we need to, I guess I am worried about populism. We should be concerned about it. I wish the Argentinians would stop trying to get back to Evita.
Yes, I think. But I guess there is something in Latin America that drives us towards that direction. It's very difficult to.
That's what we thought. We, the Yankees.
Yes.
We thought, these silly Latin Americans, they keep electing idiots as their president. And then we elected an idiot.
Well,
so we've lost our ability
yes.
to laugh at the Latin Americans. Donald Trump is is an evil idiot.
So you feel a little bit like you can understand what's
I
happening,
can
in
completely
this
understand
part of the world,
the attractions
It's-
of Juan Perón and
Yes,
it's the problem. Oh God, so
It's tragic, yes.
tragic.
Okay, so let me talk a little bit about Brazil.
I love Brazil. The last time I was in here, I went to my friend Juan Fernandez, who actually was from Argentina and fled the generals. He went out the back door as the secret police came in the front of his parents' house, and he spent his career here. But anyway, he and his anthropologist wife and I went to a samba school.
Oh yeah.
Oh! It
Did you
was
dance?
so much fun. Yeah, of course I danced.
Yeah.
This was a while ago. It was wonderful. It was a high school gymnasium and these crazy palistas all dancing. Oh, God, I loved it.
Yeah, like as you should know, like Brazil, we are a poor country.
Yeah.
And I think we rank about around 72nd in terms
Yeah.
of per capita GDP worldwide.
Yes.
We have a huge inequality, like very few very rich people and the vast majority of poor people, and maybe most importantly, poorly educated people.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of economic policy, do you think the liberal ideas, they fit Brazil the same way as they fit a rich country?
They fit Brazil better than they fit the rich countries. If you have a Danish or Swedish productivity, then, so to speak, you can afford to be careless with your income. You can afford to, let's subsidize higher education like crazy. Let's do that, even though it mainly benefits the upper middle class and the rich. Whereas what countries like Brazil, and for that matter China and India and South Africa need is permission for people to go get jobs. Permission to open a fruit stand on the street, a hot dog stand, a permission to go from the Northeast to Sao Paulo, permission to build a house, a little house, permission. And that's the liberal idea. They don't need massive subsidies from the government. Although, by the way, I approve of the Bolsa Familia.
That is my following question,
That's
actually.
the
Yeah.
following question. And I'm very amused that Bolsonaro has that in his name. Bolsa.
Yeah.
It's good. That's good. That's a good start. But and I think it's quite important that elementary education be paid for by taxes on you and me. I don't think, by the way, that the state should provide it. That doesn't follow. That you and I are taxed to pay for elementary education for everyone, for poor people. Doesn't mean that the teachers need to be employees of the government.
Okay, that's an important difference. Yeah.
Is a very big difference. I call myself a Christian liberal because as a Christian, I believe that we have an obligation to the poor. And the famous phrase, to the wretched of the earth. And I really do. But I think the best welfare program ever has been growth. You say that Brazil is poor. Well, by historical standards, it's not poor.
What do you mean by it?
Well, in 1800, income per head in Brazil was, I don't know, in modern terms, in modern prices, $1 or $2 a day per person. $33 a day, which is what your income average is now, is a great improvement over $1 a day.
The time
or
series
two.
is
The
all
time
right. It's
series
okay. Yeah.
is quite good.
Yeah.
And it, if you stop trying to use lo Stato, as the Italians say, as your instrument, and started to let the wonderful energy of the ordinary Brazilians, which everyone sees when they come to this country, allow them to, well, here's one thing that's a big problem in my own country and probably in yours too. Occupational licenses.
Mm-hmm.
In 1950, 5% of the occupations in the United States, only 5%, required a government-issued license. Now it's 30%. Oy.
Wow.
This is crazy. To become a hairdresser anywhere in the United States, you need to get a state-issued license.
I do not have the number for Brazil, but it should be
It's
about the same.
It's quite
Yeah.
high, and it's very bad for poor people.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
This is nuts. That to do a hairdresser, you need to go to school and so on. In some countries, driver's licenses are a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. But let's take important cases like, like lawyers. Look, let's go back to economics, to economists. Economists don't have licenses. Anyone in this room wants to set up as an economist, go ahead, feel free.
In Brazil, we have to have.
No kidding. Well, that's terrible.
It is expensive.
I'm against it. It's expensive. And I would carry it so far as to say that medical doctors shouldn't have licenses. No one should have licenses. What does the state have to do? And it ends up being a monopoly, which then hurts poor people.
Mm-hmm.
So this over and over and over again, there's this problem that the state, which claims to be the champion of poor people, ends up hurting the poor people.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Great. So the next question is about Bolsa Família. So it's an income transfer program to the poor people.
Sure.
And do you think a program like this goes against the liberal ideas?
No. My colleague and friend Milton Friedman, back in the 50s and 60s, was advocating a Bolsa Família. He didn't call it that because he was not, didn't speak Portuguese. But, this, except that then you've got to get rid of the other stuff. You can't have public housing, which is a big thing in Britain and the United States, and then also have a Bolsa Família.
Mm.
The income transfers like that have the virtue that that then you leave people alone, if you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
You allow them to start a little hot dog stand or be a hairdresser or be whatever you want, set up as a lawyer. Abraham Lincoln didn't go to law school.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he didn't go to the 3rd grade.
Mm-hmm.
He had 2 years of elementary education, and yet he became a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's the problem here? So if you feel that the income that people's earning is undignified, and you don't want your fellow Brazilians to fall below such and such a level, tax yourself to give them money. Do not change the legal wage. Do not. It sounds like it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for non-economists, they say, well, the minimum wage, surely that's the same thing as the Bolsa Família. No, it's not. The Bolsa Família comes from you and me being taxed. The minimum wage comes from just a law imposed on employers. Say, then we won't need to tax ourselves. We'll just force one group of people, the people who own companies, little companies, big companies, we'll make them pay more.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't, we'll put them in jail.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the characteristic way of the state
Perfect.
is violence, coercion. Whereas, taxes are coerced, I admit that, of course, but it's so much cleaner and more
Perfect.
honest to say, okay, I'll pay for elementary education, for the masses, for everyone, and for the Bolsa Familia, and then I'm going to leave them alone and allow them to prosper.
Perfect.
And they will, because that's what's happened in China and India.
Perfect. Yeah. So maybe we can think about Bolsa Familia as a important technology for liberal ideas to work in poor countries.
It is.
Right?
It is.
Because for you to allow people to be by their own, they have to have some minimal conditions.
Under the Modi government in India, which unfortunately is turning into this, or stressing this Hindu nationalism stuff, that it's horrible. But they've tried to introduce essentially a Bolsa Familia with the express idea of getting rid of the masses of regulations and subsidies that, of course, are mainly sources of corruption. One advantage of the Bolsa Familia in that kind of program is that there's one government bureaucrat who gives the money, not 100 or 1,000 with their hands out for a bribe. They call that old system in India the license Raj. The king, Raj means king in Sanskrit, in Hindi. And if you have lots of regulations, you have lots of corruption.
Yeah, that's right. So like my last question, it's a more general question. You say that ideas are the most important driver for long-term economic growth.
They are.
Yeah, more important than capital accumulation.
Yeah.
And like producing ideas is not easy.
No.
Yeah.
Or else we'd all have them.
Yeah, yeah. And so like, do you think if Brazil has to produce ideas to become a rich country, do you think Brazil can become a rich country?
Yes, of course it can. And you do not need education for this, by the way. Look, by ideas, I mean any idea. You come from Recife, and you're poor, and you have the idea of moving to Sao Paulo. That's an idea too.
Perfect.
If you just sit there in Recife and you're hungry, that's just to go with the flow. That's just to go with what's already there. And I'm not against going with what's already there in many cases, but to get better off, you need to make this very courageous leap. I love the statues, the clay statues from the Northeast, and they're tiny little figures, painted figures. They're beautiful, I love them. And there's one in particular that I have at home in Chicago, which shows a group of people escaping a famine in the Northeast. Well, so the ideas can be, I start what I said, the hot dog stand, or I go to a new place to work, or I start a new factory, or I have a whole new idea about making airplanes. Brazil, as you know, has a company that is very good at making small airplanes, and it sells all over the world. Well, some engineer had a good idea. We're not going to try to compete with Boeing or Airbus and make enormous airplanes. We're going to make the small airplanes, the commuter, and they've had great success. So, and it's not competing. You hear this a lot in business schools. It's silly. It's not competing. It's just letting people try out ideas.
Perfect.
And
they do not have to be fancy ideas.
It doesn't have to be fancy ideas, and it's the government is not good at doing it. Now, people like Mariana Mazzucato, an American who works in Britain, an economist, She says, oh yeah, the government should do the innovations. Well, this is truly crazy. Does it strike you as a good idea to turn over innovation management to some people, some bureaucrats in Brasilia? Considering that Brasilia itself, the existence of Brasilia, is a perfect example of stupid government policy, stupid government investment. Brasilia was a terrible idea. I think
I agree with you, yeah.
most Brazilians agree with me on this. And yet it's one of the leading, the new Brazilian century, we're going to put this modernist temple in the middle of
Nothing else.
place. Look, what we need is a free society that can imitate when that's the smart thing to do, can think of new ways of doing things when that's the smart thing to do. I mean, consider, for example, in India, in the south, they have this enormous computer service industry because they have a lot of engineers, not terribly well trained, but lots of them. And a very good job for such people is to advise computer idiots like me in the United States over the phone, and they call up and say, hello, my name is George. I am George. And I always say to them, look, your name is not George. Tell me what your name is. I love cricket just as much as you do. Let's just deal with each other. But in any case, that's a brilliant idea, and it's worked very well. And this is the kind of thing that Brazil could do if it stopped believing in the man on the white horse, stopped believing in the state as the state is going to help me. There's an old joke, an American joke. What are the three most unbelievable sentences in English? It's slightly off color. First one is, the check is in the mail. I'm paying you, but it'll take a week or so to come, but the check is in the mail. Number two, of course I'll respect you in the morning. And the third one is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
Oh my God. Actually, when I lived in the US, I received a check by mail. I did receive, yeah.
Well, that's right, because most people are honest about that. That's what makes the joke good.
Right.
Most people, it's a good one, but for some people, you don't want to believe it.
Perfect, yeah. Thank you so very much for talking with us. We at Porque, our website is called Porque, which is why in English. Yeah, we try to.
Porque in Italian.
Porque, yeah.
Pourquoi?
Yeah, we try to talk about economic ideas in a simple way.
I'm in favor.
In general, economic ideas, they are not complicated, but people think they are.
Well, but yeah, and what's odd about them is that even professors of economics like me or PhDs like you, we keep these very simple ideas keep dropping out of our heads, and that's why it's very good for a professor of economics to teach elementary economics to first-year students, because then she's having to, make it clear why there's such a thing as opportunity cost. Yeah. If I move the glass that way, I can't at the same time move it that way. So there's a cost, and maybe 10 other things which we keep, you and I keep slightly forgetting.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you so very much. It was really enjoyable. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Bye-bye.